Next, we have Maya Tusi. I don't know if he's got a swap. No, I think he's got everything on here. So without further ado, Maya.
Hello. So what's, I think, sitting from up there, I can tell that the bride has a bigger family. No, he looks like a wedding. I haven't been married, but you know, I just sort of was nervous sitting there looking at this thing, going, my family didn't show up. Sorry, I don't have a Bin Laden joke. I think the common denominator between the last two panelists that was on and myself is, as you can tell, we're a little dark, and we have sort of taken what we do and apply it to the things that we care about. And I think in and itself that is an interesting thing. And one of the things that somebody was mentioning here earlier today was that that this is the time where the American immigrant population, specifically from the Middle East and from the Muslim world and South Asia, is sort of coming into its own. And I think that's what we reflect is just a very natural progression as to what has happened with the Irish, with the Italians, with the Jews that have come to this country. The second generation, third generation start actually no longer distancing themselves from where they came from, but also and actually embracing it and making it part of the American experience. And I think that's what this is about. So my presentation is slightly a bit different. I'm not I'm a filmmaker and a storyteller by design, so that's the way I think. And the way I would explain it is that I'm a junkie more than a filmmaker, because you have to be to some extent. Oh yeah, this I actually Googled story junkie, and this is what came up, so I figured I'd throw it on there. I was accidentally born in Portland, Oregon in 1973, and promptly moved back to Iran, where within 6 years we had a revolution and a war. By third grade, my day-to-day routine, my family's was food rations, and by nighttime we were in bomb shelters. We had the hostage crisis, as you can imagine, so it was exciting times in terms of action, but really not that much fun if you were into stories and you were trying to get your hands on the latest movie or trying to have a comic book collection like I was. Couldn't do that. It was not good. So I was really into mythology, and I really loved historical fiction. And if you're from Iran, that guy on the right does not reflect the way we looked at our mythology. Actually, I put that. Somebody sent me that postcard. That guy in the back on the wall, that's the same guy who was in 300. So the way we looked at our culture was a bit different. So I had to figure out how the hell I was going to get my hands on the things I wanted to get. And like most Iranians, I had to go to the open market to try to get it. So I would take my holiday cash, my monthly allowance, and I would go to the black market and deal with the street sellers and stuff. And soon I realized that that's not going to work. As every junkie knows, your pocket money isn't enough. So I started my first business as an entrepreneur, sewing buttons for the male members of my family, charging a lot of money, sometimes sabotaging their clothes because the new Tintin was out and I had to get my hands on it. That's me in Life magazine. It was a big business. So I had my first, I left Iran when I was 13, but before I left, I was lucky enough to actually understand that these stories meant something. I watched my first issue film in a theater in Tehran called Battle of Algiers, as you know, and watched my first film about the environment 2 months later in the same theater. It was also my first Kurosawa, Derasu Uzala. And realized that all of these stories that I was reading, they all had this moral message, but there was something to it. It wasn't just a story, that there was value in that story. And luckily, all of this happened before I left, because when I came here, I entered the high school abyss of American anti-cultural experience, and really, this was where it was all anchored, because I don't think I would have watched Derasu Uzala or Battle of Algiers in high school. My dad taught me about the workers' rights, and so it was Charlie Chaplin and my dad that I learned these things from. I learned from, ironically, the national epic of Iran, the Book of Kings, and the state propaganda about the folly of kings. It was through George Orwell that I learned that revolutions and fanatics can cause some trouble. It was also my mother. You know, I had a pretty active imagination, and half the problem was that I couldn't really really ever imagine myself turning what my passion was into my profession. That I couldn't imagine. And I left at 13, and it really didn't happen until I was 27. I was in New York City, and that's me being very dispassionate on a subway in 1999, where the light bulb went off, and I decided, you know what, the hell with it. I'm 7 years out of school. I'm making a lot of money doing what I'm doing, but I'm going to give it all up and go back to school and try to become a filmmaker. And you know, and was very happy, as you can tell. First of all, I couldn't find a brown happy person, but so I got a yellow one. I was very happy when everyone told you, write what you know. I'm like, fantastic. That's exactly what I want to do. I've read so many books. You know, I read, I think, Gone with the Wind and War and Peace before I was 12. So I was really excited. I'm like, I can apply that to what I know and what my culture is, and I was so excited about that. Until, I mean, I'll give you the experience of going to school and coming to a time where it was actually had made films, and I traveled around, and when I wanted to make my own films and things that I cared about, everybody told me that, A, my films were too niche for the scale that I wanted to tell them in, or that the stuff that I cared about was just not ever going to sort of be made in the way that I wanted to make them, which was like the movies I like Spartacus, like Ben-Hur, like Battle of Algiers. That's what I wanted to make, but I wanted to make it about those places. And so, as you can imagine, I was not happy. And the reason it didn't make any sense to me is because I lived in Iran during the revolution and the war, and I loved Spartacus, and I loved Rostam, which was our Achilles in the Book of Kings. And so I figured if I can, you know, I read Gone with the Wind, and I didn't think it was too ethnic. I was in Iran, but, you know, so I'm like, why, you know, I loved them because they were rich characters and they were fantastic stories, so why wouldn't it work the other way? It just, I couldn't buy it. It didn't make any sense to me. So I kept pushing and pushing, and until in 2005, 2006, you know, the idea came out of utter and complete frustration. And I think anyone who's ever sort of gone after their own thing and really decided that, you know what, I'm going to throw the rule book out, is come out of frustration. And I think that's one of the biggest recipes to success, is that you got to get really pissed off. And you got to be told no so many times that you eventually give up trying to go in the front door. And in 2005, I was hired to do a documentary about Iran, which, you know, I figured, you know, I'd done documentaries, I knew Iran. When I was told that, no, you know, what you know isn't really what people know, and really Iran, the US is about to attack Iran, Iraq was going so well at the time, and it's the nuclear issue, and really, you know, I know you think that the fact that 80% of Iran's population is under 30 is really explosive and important, but it's really not that important, and what you want to talk about is the nuclear issue, and maybe we can talk about the kids on the side. And I was like, you know what, the hell with it. And luckily, I was working on it with this guy named Reza Aslan, who became my good friend and my partner, and we had this idea to, you know what, let's create a company in which we make the decisions, and then no one can tell us no. And then that was a silly idea because it took a long time before we could actually even say yes or no to anything. So Boomgen Studios is our company, and Boomgen stands for 75% of the population of the greater Middle East that's under the age of 35. That's what the Boomgen stands for. The reason why we called it Boomgen Studios is because we wanted to talk about a geographical area that was very vast, that it consisted of a lot of different people. And we found two things that were important to us that were in common. One of them was the fact that they were all extremely young, on an average 75% under the age of 35. And the other was that they all have a shared history of storytelling. It's happened through a cultural and mythological osmosis over thousands of years before there was such a thing as a nation or borders. And because of that, and even people in the region don't even really realize themselves that they have the same stories, that they have the same sense of morality that comes from the same mythological framework of their lives. And to give you a very easy example of it, three of the biggest religions are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and they all come from the greater Middle East. And so, yes, we do have this shared cultural mythology. And given the fact that we have this framework, that was very interesting to us. And we wanted to frame our company not by things that were divisive like race and religion, but rather things that were inclusive, that were more of the world that we're coming into. Unfortunately, this was in 2006, and this was the image that people have of the region. So when you told people 75% of publishing on 0 to 35, they would run out the door and say, oh my God, we were really screwed. That's 75% that was a lot easy to brainwash young kids. And so who knew that within 3 years of us starting, that image, this one, was going to be replaced by this one. We were saying it, but we didn't, in our wildest dreams, ever imagine that this was going to happen so quickly. And so, and it had such an impact on the world. One of the most amazing things about this whole thing was that not only this Boomgen, this young generation, became one of the biggest stories of the last God knows how long. They also told the story themselves, and I think, we talked about new media, so I brought the transmedia sort of presentation. So, and Jeff is here, so I'm really nervous. So this is sort of my sort of talk about transmedia from the perspective of who I am and this that I hope everybody knows about. So the story of the Iran's election, a case study on transmedia storytelling. So I'm not sure how much people know about transmedia. Can we get a raise of hands if you know what transmedia is? All right, so probably half of people know and the other half don't, and hopefully by the end of this thing you'll have a better idea and I won't confuse you. So how was the story of the Iranian election told? Iranians in Iran and Iranians outside of Iran banded together and used whatever media they could get their hands on to tell the story of what happened before, during, and after the election. They used images. They used video uploaded on YouTube. They used poetry that was recorded and said over the Tehran night sky. They used comic strips. They used even film and television. They made phone calls. They did all sorts of things to tell the story. And if you really wanted to get this story, you couldn't just watch CNN. You couldn't just be on Twitter. You had to go from one platform to the next in order to get the rest of the story, to get the emotional stuff, to get the facts, to get the latest information. You had to go back and find about who were the characters that were involved, who are these people with these weird names. Why is it that all of a sudden mullahs all have different opinions? All of these things were complicated, and because they were complicated, you had to get access to the information. And the information existed because people put it out there. So because of this reason, the experience of the Iran election was a transmedia experience. It was a story that was very powerful, and that's something that no one can deny. But it was a story that was told through multiple mediums, and you couldn't get the full story. You still can't get the full story, that's the problem. But you couldn't get the full story if you were on one medium or the other. And to really get it, you had to really immerse yourself. And what it took was another key element, which is a key element of transmedia, which is the participation of its audience. At the end of the day, the story was a powerful story, but because it brought in its audience, which was Iranians in Iran, Iranians abroad, it captured the imagination of the mainstream media only because it captured the imagination of millions and millions of non-Iranians who went on Facebook, found new friends. Some of my best Facebook friends that I don't know are people that I met during the Iran election. And they still communicate with me, and they're amazing. And so the experience was a very enriching experience, despite the fact that it didn't go as well as we would have liked in Iran. So Boomgen is a first-of-its-kind motion picture company that's entirely focused on entertainment content about the peoples and cultures of the Middle East. That's what we do. We're designed to do it. We don't do anything else. And to do that, unfortunately, you have to, or fortunately, you have to have a really broad understanding as to how films are made and how they're marketed and how they exist within capitalist world, because that's where we live in. And if you want to make a movie, and if you don't know your audience, and you don't know how to market to your audience, as Tariq was saying, then you're going to have a tough time. And so we had to inherently understand that information. And the important part isn't that you just have a powerful story. It's absolutely necessary. But you also need a community that story really, really communicates to. You need to engage that community. You need to buy their participation, and then you can be successful. And that inherently is the core of transmedia, but is also how we look at everything that we do, even if it's not a transmedia project, that it has those elements or that we can introduce those elements into it. So what have we done? We started working on other people's projects initially. So we got, we worked on Rendition, Body of Lies, Amrika, Prince of Persia, and just recently on Miral with the Weinstein Company and Schnabel. And starting last year, we started producing our own content. We do comedies, thrillers. We're doing 2 major transmedia projects. We're doing documentaries, television documentaries, etc. Short form content, action, you name it. We're doing it. We're up to 7 projects now in development. The 7th one will be announced soon. And some of you might still be unconvinced that somehow the Iranian election story was that powerful, that it really, really did what I'm saying it did. And I think it's a fair question. But I have a pretty good example, and I think this just showed up last week, that, this guy, the muscular guy on the right, Superman. He stands for everything that's American and America. I don't know how many of you know, but Superman in the April issue of DC Comics, Action Comics, is renouncing his American citizenship. He's renouncing his American citizenship because he went to Iran during the aftermath of the election, and because he went there and got involved, he was accused, Ahmadinejad personally himself, accused the US for interfering in Iranian affairs, and he had consequences that he was unhappy with. And he realized that, I should even quote him. What does he say? He said, "I'm tired of having my actions constructed as instruments of US policy. Truth, justice, and the American way, it's not enough anymore." And that inherently is the power of that story and the power of the world that we live in. Superman, the very fabric of what we understand about being American is changing. It's because the world is changing. It's not because of that. But the idea that my stories and the stories I care about are too ethnic, or anybody's stories for that matter, whether they're Muslim, Iranian, Arab, South Asian, Latin American, whatever they may be, if they're American, is nonsense. The reality is that if you tell a good story, if you have rich characters, and your story is told in a way that it can reach its audience, and that's the tough part, is that the stranglehold, the bottleneck is the industry. If it has those things, then your story is relevant and your story will have an audience. And don't let anyone tell you that you can't tell your story because it's too ethnic or it's too niche. Just think big. That's the bottom line. Anyway. Okay.